A very strong case can be made that caffeine contributed to the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason and the Industrial Revolution, all of which required us to think in much more focused linear terms. Caffeine was an amazing aid to the rise of capitalism.
Have you ever thought about how much control your morning cup of coffee exercises over your entire day? What if something as simple as cutting back a little on caffeine was the secret to relieving anxiety and improving well-being? This is what Dr. Michael Pollan found out in his exploration of the world of caffeine. Insights that could just make you rethink your daily coffee habit. Caffeine is just like that familiar friend we all know. The one who always steps in to lift your spirits when you are feeling low, yet occasionally makes us wonder if life would be better without his presence. On his chat on The Joe Rogan Experience, Dr. Michael Pollan takes us through the twists and turns of this tumultuous relationship with caffeine. And trust me, it's really enlightening. After 3 months of abstaining from caffeine, Pollan chose to treat himself to a cup of coffee. One might wonder, what's the big deal? It's just coffee. Yet for Pollan, this moment was nothing less than psychedelic. With that first sip, he experienced waves of euphoria as if he had consumed a potent substance. He described it as a feeling so profound that it bordered on the otherworldly. It's hard to imagine that something as mundane as coffee can carry such power, is it not? Yet that is precisely the crux of the problem. Caffeine packs much more of a punch than we typically give it credit for. For most of us, caffeine has become a well-loved ritual. We rely on that morning cup of coffee or tea to invigorate our day, banish the lingering grogginess, and set us in motion. This is a habit so deeply ingrained that we rarely stop to think about its impact. Yet here lies truth. Though caffeine might provide just what we need to get us going, it simultaneously draws us into a vicious cycle from which we find it hard to break free. This is the extent of Pollan's struggle to quit caffeine. He talked about feeling like a completely different person without it, unable to focus, disconnected from reality, almost as if his true self was buried under layers of caffeine withdrawal.
Well, there was the withdrawal, which took a few days and was very unpleasant. I felt like kind of muzzy-headed. I felt like this veil had fallen between me and reality. Things seemed less fresh, less immediate. I didn't have the headaches that some people report, and I didn't have the flu-like symptoms, but I didn't feel myself.
This love-hate relationship with caffeine isn't unique to Pollan. How often do you find yourself grabbing that cup of coffee, not because you want it, but because you need it? Maybe it's become more about staving off the withdrawal symptoms than actually enjoying the taste or the buzz. Pollan's story has made me realize how our dependence on caffeine is much more dangerous for us. It's not just an early morning pick-me-up that matters. It's the way caffeine intricately weaves itself into the very fabric of our daily lives, often leaving us feeling like we can't function without it. Forgetting caffeine may seem like a trivial task, but as Dr. Michael Pollan discovered, it is far from it. Imagine waking up one morning and deciding to cut off that one thing that's been your go-to for energy, focus, and just getting through the day. That's what Pollan did, and the first few weeks were nothing short of a nightmare. Before we move on, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. Imagine what we could accomplish if everyone subscribed. Pollan recounted his experience as one of feeling utterly out of sync with reality. It's like he was seeing the world through a foggy window. Everything seemed distant, almost unreal. Concentration, a gift we frequently overlook, transformed into a formidable challenge for him. He spoke of an unsettling sensation, as if he had abruptly acquired ADD, incapable of concentrating on any task for longer than a fleeting moment. Every minor detail appeared to seize his attention, diverting him from the very things he needed to accomplish. For a writer like Pollan, who largely depends on his ability to focus and think clearly, this was a very hard pill to swallow. What Pollan was experiencing was not merely a bad mood or a deficiency in motivation. It was, quite simply, caffeine withdrawal. And you've been relying on caffeine for years, your body and mind get used to that daily dose. Taking it all of a sudden throws everything off balance. Pollan's experience is perfect to illustrate how powerful and sneaky caffeine can be. it is not merely about that morning boost. It has to do with how deeply it incorporates into our functioning day in and day out. Still, even with the tough first weeks, it turned out to be well worth quitting caffeine for Pollan. His sleep was one of the biggest benefits he saw. Without caffeine, he found himself sleeping like he probably had as a teenager. Deeply, without any interruption.
I mean, these are people who understand sleep and the importance of sleep. And one of the benefits, I didn't mention one of the benefits of being off coffee, is I slept like a teenager. It was fantastic. I had some great sleeps.
Refueling him in ways he'd nearly forgotten. There was also the anxiety, or rather, the lack of it. Pollan realized that without this perpetual jolt of caffeine, he felt much calmer and more at peace with the world surrounding him. One can hardly imagine a world without coffee, tea, or chocolate. But hardly so long ago was an age in which these everyday pleasures were completely unknown to Europe. The tale of the origin of caffeine as a constituent part of our everyday life goes far beyond just being a drink. It represents a transformation of society itself. Caffeine made its spectacular entrance into Europe in the 1600s, and it wasn't too long before it started causing a hue and cry. Prior to this, people's relationship with drinks was completely different.
There is a lot of evidence linking coffee and tea consumption with the Enlightenment in France and with the Age of Reason in England. And people in the 1600s started writing about it. So like, wow, people, we have this new civil and sober drink and it was so popular because it was new that people drank less and they used more caffeine.
Interestingly, water used to be dangerous to drink due to contamination, so people opted for alcohol. Beer, cider, and other fermented drinks were consumed morning, noon, and night, not only as fun beverages but also because it was safer than water. Even little children were given low-alcohol drinks because, well, better buzzed than sick, right? Then came caffeine, appearing as coffee, tea, and chocolate, and everything started to change. These drinks first burst onto the European scene that same decade, throwing off what one might call a caffeine revolution. Suddenly, there were alternatives to alcohol, drinks that exhilarated rather than stupefied, restoring people's spirits and sharpening their wits. This is not by coincidence, as this era falls during the Enlightenment, a time when reason and science began to dominate the landscape of Europe. Consider, coffee houses sprouted everywhere in England and France, becoming a favorite haunt for intellectuals, artists, and ordinary people to gather, to debate, and to exchange ideas. These places were often termed penny universities, since, for the price of a cup of coffee, you might listen to some of the brightest minds of the day, discussing the latest ideas. The stimulating effects of caffeine helped fuel this era of intellectual growth, making it easier for people to focus, think clearly, and stay awake for those late-night discussions. The role of caffeine also went beyond cognitive enhancement in the description. It played a key role in the dawn of capitalism and the Industrial Revolution. As labor transitioned from the open fields to the factories that were thronged by people, the demand for a more alert and focused workforce intensified. Unlike the relaxed and often inebriated workers of yesteryear, factory employees required precision and vigilance, frequently toiling long hours in demanding environments. Coffee breaks emerged not solely due to a passion for coffee, but because they fostered productivity and efficiency, precisely what the rapidly developing industries required. This humble ritual, the coffee break, a seemingly minor aspect of our day that we frequently overlook, possesses an intriguingly rich origin story. It all began in a necktie factory in Denver during the tumultuous years of World War II, of all places. At that time, the factory, known as Wigwam Weavers, was grappling with a significant productivity issue. With many of their most skilled workers away fighting in the war, they were compelled to depend on older men and women to maintain operations. But there was a catch. These workers, although skilled, couldn't keep up the pace for a full day. In a desperate bid to boost productivity, the factory owners did something simple, yet revolutionary. They asked the workers what they needed to perform better. The answer? A break and some coffee. Sounds almost too simple, doesn't it? But when the factory gave the workers a recess at 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., along with a cup of coffee, the success came overnight in record time. The gains in productivity were spectacular, as was the improvement in quality control. Workers were much happier. The initiative of the coffee break gained ground very fast. Employers up and down took to it as a smart business move, since it could be nothing more pleasant than offering a little shot of caffeine. A timely coffee break allowed employees to stay alert, attentive, and even more productive throughout the day. It was as if caffeine had become a stealth weapon in the endless battle for efficiency. Having avoided it for 3 months, Dr. Michael Pollan decided it was time to face the beast and enjoy his very first cup of coffee. This was no ordinary cup of coffee. It was a moment he had awaited with a blend of curiosity and trepidation. He selected a snug corner in a quaint local cafe, settled in beside his wife, and savored that first sip. What followed was nothing less than remarkable. As the rich brew coursed through him, Pollan found himself engulfed by a wave of excitement like that he had never known. It was as if his whole body had been awaiting that moment, and now, with that near-familiar rush of caffeine, everything seemed to fall into place. He described it as almost a near-psychedelic experience, a sudden and intense rush of what could best be described as an overwhelming feeling of well done, rendering him virtually invincible. He stayed on this high for about 20 minutes, marveling at the sheer power of what was, in essence, just a cup of coffee. But just as suddenly as the euphoria arrived, it began to shift into something far less pleasant. Pollan found that he felt irritable, almost jittery, as if the world around him had grown too loud, too fast. A garbage truck raked and scraped across the street, making a racket, and the noise cut through his nerves in ways it normally wouldn't have. He felt an overwhelming urge to do something, anything, to seize this torrent of energy. Pollan's initial impulse was to embrace productivity, and he immersed himself in a whirlwind of activity, from unsubscribing from unwanted emails to reorganizing his closet. It was as if caffeine had ignited a switch in his mind, transforming him into a tempest of compulsive behavior. Although he accomplished much during this episode, the experience left him feeling unsettled by the sheer potency of caffeine. When Dr. Michael Pollan came across the stimulating effects of caffeine, he was determined not to fall back into a daily dependency cycle. On the other hand, he did not want to cut out coffee entirely, since that first cup after his 3-month absence felt nothing short of magical. So he did what any bright individual might do. He decided to limit himself to Saturdays. He found that limiting himself to just 1 day a week for his coffee intake let him appreciate the benefits of this caffeine but did not get consumed by it. Saturday became an exciting day, one he looked forward to. On this day, he could enjoy his coffee and harness its energy for a productive boost. It worked in a way that allowed him to retain the clarity and focus that caffeine brings about without the daily addiction that so frequently fosters anxiety and jitters. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.